Hello everyone, it's Dr. Ryan coming to you from my office with another video review of one of the Step 1 Free 120 questions. Today we'll take a look at Block 2, Question 22. As always, I'll put a link to the question below this video, but on this slide I've summarized the key points. So this question describes a study of cardiovascular risk factors, and they tell you that LDL concentration has a correlation of 0.6 with high sensitivity CRP concentration. And so based on this information, what they want to know is which of the following statements best describes the relationship between LDL concentration and high sensitivity CRP concentration based on this finding. And they give you 4 answer choices, which you can read to yourselves. Okay, so this is a pretty straightforward question if you understand what a correlation coefficient is. So let's talk about that now. So a correlation coefficient, also sometimes called the Pearson correlation coefficient, is a number that ranges anywhere from -1 all the way up to +1. And it tells you the association between two different independent variables, in this case, LDL and high sensitivity CRP. So if the correlation coefficient between LDL and CRP was 0, that would mean that those two numbers are totally unrelated. In other words, when one of them goes up, there's no associated increase or decrease in the other variable. On the other hand, if the relationship between LDL and CRP was +1 for a correlation coefficient, that means that these two variables are extremely tightly related, such that when one goes up, the other one goes up by nearly an identical amount. And in medical science, you never find correlations of +1. The only way you get correlations like this are with physical variables, things like gravity and electrical charges, things that are determined by nature to be locked together. You usually don't see that in medical science. So that's a +1 correlation. A -1 correlation means that every time one of these variables goes up, the other goes down by an identical amount. So they are tightly related, but the association is negative, such that one is going up and the other is going down. Okay, so with that basis in mind, what they tell us is that the correlation from this study is +0.6. So this means that anytime LDL goes up, there is an associated increase in high sensitivity CRP. Not a perfectly identical associated increase. That would give us a correlation coefficient of 1, but still a pretty decent correlation that comes out to 0.6. And so if you know that this is what a correlation coefficient means, you can look at the answer choices and see that answer choice A is the correct answer. Higher LDL concentrations are associated with higher hsCRP concentrations. In other words, when the LDL goes up and becomes a higher number, you're going to see an associated increase in high sensitivity CRP. And if you know something about cardiovascular disease risk factors, which you don't have to know to answer this question, but if you do know something about those risk factors, both LDL and CRP are related to risk of cardiovascular disease. So it makes sense that they have a positive correlation. In other words, someone who's at high risk of cardiovascular disease is likely to have a high LDL and also likely to have a high hsCRP. All right, as to the wrong answers, B says higher LDL concentrations are associated with lower high sensitivity CRP concentrations. This is not correct. This would be the right answer if the correlation coefficient were -0.6, but it's +0.6, so this answer is wrong. Then answer choice C says higher LDL concentrations cause higher hsCRP concentrations. This is not correct. So hopefully you've heard this expression before, but correlation does not equal causation. So just because LDL and CRP are correlated together, that doesn't mean a higher value of one causes the other value to be high. It just means they're associated. Causality in medicine is very difficult to determine. We only say this after years and years of study of something and lots of data. So for example, we can say that smoking causes lung cancer, but we have thousands of population studies and basic science studies and cancer studies that allow us to say definitively that smoking causes cancer. For something like this, where there's an association between LDL and CRP, and when one goes up, the other goes up, you can't say that those cause each other to happen. In other words, that a high value of one causes a high value of the other. There just isn't enough information from this one study. You would need lots of evidence of that before you could say that. And then finally, answer choice D says higher LDL concentrations cause lower hsCRP concentrations. Again, this is not right because the correlation coefficient only tells us that the two variables are correlated. It doesn't tell us anything about causation. That requires lots and lots of extensive data and research. And that concludes our video review of the Step 1 Free 120 Block 2 Question 22.